The strategy was supposed to prevent war, but it immediately triggered a barrage. Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to scale back military exercises with South Korea, hoping to de-escalate tensions, and within 24 hours Pyongyang responded by launching 10 ballistic missiles. That is not the only paradox on the board today. Russia claims it wants peace, yet it just sent a massive drone and missile swarm into Kyiv, and while Washington tries to economically isolate Iran, Israel is bombing air bases in Syria that link back to a NATO ally. Start with the missiles that just changed the Pacific. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed the launches, detecting the projectiles from the eastern coast of North Korea, and Japan's Defense Ministry tracked the flight paths as they splashed down outside Japanese territorial waters. What happened here is a direct escalation following a perceived concession, where the United States reduced the scope and length of exercises to lower regional temperatures, and the North Korean state read it as a vulnerability or a green light, choosing to flex its missile force rather than reciprocate. The launches, detected by both South Korean and Japanese radar systems, came a day after Pyongyang shrugged off the American order to cut the drills, and the message is clear, because the capability is now proven. When you fire 10 missiles in a single day, you are demonstrating a capacity or saturation strikes, which is a doctrine designed to overwhelm missile defenses by presenting more targets than interceptors can handle, and that shifts the tactical math across the entire region. What is still unverified is the exact variant of the missiles used, because defense analysts are reviewing the apogee and flight time to determine if these were improved versions of the KN-23 or older Scud derivatives, and that distinction matters because the newer systems are harder to track and intercept. What changed from yesterday is the end of a brief pause in North Korean provocations, because the drills were cut to calm the waters, and instead the water is churning, and the trajectory points toward a cycle where concessions are met with demonstrations of force. This matters because it alters the defense calculus in the Pacific, and insurance premiums for shipping in the Sea of Japan will tick up, while defense contractors tracking Pacific missile defense systems see increased demand. And the political fallout in Seoul is immediate, because the South Korean government has to explain to its public why American flexibility produced North Korean missiles. The South Korean military is on heightened alert, and the realist question is whether this launches a news cycle of provocation or opens a back channel for dialogue, and the clearest sign will be a satellite launch or a nuclear test, because those are the next rungs on the ladder. And while the Pacific absorbs the shock of 10 missiles, the skies over Eastern Europe just filled with a different kind of swarm. How do you defend a capital when your interceptor missiles are running dry? That is the question Ukraine is facing today after a massive Russian missile and drone barrage targeted Kyiv overnight, resulting in 16 casualties and overwhelming a depleted air defense network. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the attack, stating that a mix of cruise missiles and self-detonating drones struck the capital region in an hours-long bombardment that began just before midnight, and the intensity of the strike forced residents into shelters for extended periods as air raid sirens echoed across the city. What happened is a coordinated strike designed to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses, because Moscow is taking advantage of Kyiv's depleted stock of interceptors, and the result is a worsening civilian toll as fewer missiles are intercepted and more warheads reach their targets. The Guardian confirmed that explosions could be heard clearly from the city center within minutes of the first warning, and the timing, earlier than the normal pattern of Russian missile strikes, suggests a tactical shift designed to catch civilians and responders off guard. What is still unverified is the exact mix of munitions used, because Ukrainian Air Force spokespeople are analyzing the debris, but early indicators point to a combination of Shahed series drones and air-launched cruise missiles. And that matters because the drones are cheap whilst the interceptors are expensive, creating an unsustainable economic drain on Ukraine's defense budget. What changed from yesterday is the continued escalation of the tempo and intensity of strikes on the capital, because Russia is not just probing, it is executing a sustained campaign to break the will of the population and cripple the energy grid as winter approaches, And the second-order effects are severe because insurance premiums for infrastructure in Kyiv are skyrocketing, while European allies are scrambling to find and ship additional air defense batteries. This matters because it signals a shift in Russian doctrine from targeted strikes to saturation bombardment, and the trajectory points toward a winter of grid denial, where the real question is whether Western air defense aid arrives in time to prevent a systemic collapse of the power network. In a separate but linked development, NATO fighter jets scrambled to destroy a suspected Russian drone near the Neptun deep gas facility in the Black Sea, and The Independent confirmed that the aircraft were launched to intercept the reconnaissance drone before it could reach the critical energy infrastructure. And this marks a significant escalation because it represents an active NATO engagement, with a Russian asset threatening a gas facility. The drone was destroyed, but the incident raises questions about the rules of engagement along the NATO frontier, because the gas facility is a critical piece of European energy infrastructure, and any strike on it would have knock-on effects for European energy markets. And the real question is whether this sets a new precedent for NATO engagement. And while Kyiv counts the cost of the overnight barrage, the bigger move today came out of Washington, where a new economic war is opening against Tehran. The military strikes failed to bring Tehran to the table, so now the United States is pivoting to a different kind of warfare. President Donald Trump on Truth Social announced what he called the most crushing economic operation ever, threatening tremendous economic consequences for any country that helps or does business with Iran. And the immediate market reaction was sharp, because oil prices jumped above $94 a barrel as traders priced in the risk of a major supply disruption. What happened is a fundamental shift in American strategy, because the United States is moving away from kinetic strikes and toward total economic isolation, and the mechanism is a threat to secondary sanctions, meaning any nation that buys Iranian oil or trades with Tehran faces the loss of access to the American financial system, and that is a massive stick that forces a choice on the global South. The threat is not just rhetorical, because the Pentagon is simultaneously mobilizing forces for Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, and the combination of economic pressure and military posture creates a dual track that Tehran must navigate. And the Iranian foreign minister dismissed the threat, saying it will only bring further defeat, according to CBS News. What is still unverified is the exact enforcement mechanism, because the Treasury Department has not yet published the specific regulations that will govern the secondary sanctions, and the lack of detail is creating uncertainty in the market, which is itself a weapon because uncertainty drives up insurance premiums and shipping costs. And the second-order effects are rippling through the global economy. The price of oil is the clearest indicator, because a move above $94 means inflationary pressure is returning to the global economy, and the shipping insurance market is hardening, with premiums for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz doubling in some cases. And that affects every consumer because energy costs are a base input for every product. The real question is whether China and Russia will provide a lifeline to Tehran, and the clearest sign will be increased Chinese oil purchases or Russian arms transfers. Because if they do, the American economic operation will face a major test. The paradox is that the harder the United States pushes, the more it pushes Tehran toward Beijing and Moscow, and that realignment is a structural shift in the global order. And the real question is whether the economic pressure fractures the Iranian state or solidifies its alliances with the East. And while Washington tries to isolate Tehran, Israel is opening a new front in Syria that threatens to pull a NATO ally into the conflict. The strike was meant to send a message, but the recipient was not the target. Israel bombed the Abu al-Duhur airbase in Syria, and while the physical target was a military installation, the political target was Ankara, because the airbase is linked to Turkish military operations, and the strike represents a significant escalation between two American allies in the region. What happened is an Israeli airstrike on a Syrian facility that is being used by Turkish-backed forces, and the Long War Journal confirmed the strike, while Haaretz reported that the Israeli defense minister warned Turkey against dangerous adventures in Syria. And the combination of the strike and the warning is a clear signal that Israel is drawing a red line against Turkish military expansion in the country. The strike was early Tuesday morning, and it heightened tensions among three close American partners because the United States was not warned in advance about the operation, and a Syrian official told Axios that Israel bombed Syria despite Turkish assurances. And that detail is critical because it means the strike was designed to disrupt a Turkish buildup, not just to hit a target. What is still unverified is the exact nature of the Turkish presence at the airbase, because the Israeli Defense Forces have not disclosed the specific intelligence that prompted the strike. But the presence of Turkish-linked personnel is the central claim, and that matters, because it means Israel is treating Turkish military expansion in Syria as a direct threat to its security. What changed from yesterday is a shift from a proxy conflict to a direct confrontation, because Israel is no longer just striking Iranian assets in Syria, it is striking Turkish-linked assets, and that elevates the risk of a direct clash between two major regional powers. And the second-order effects are significant because it complicates the American alliance structure, because the United States is allied to both Israel and Turkey through NATO, and a clash between them would be a crisis for the alliance. This matters because it signals a new phase in the Syrian conflict, where the Turkish military presence is now a target, and the trajectory points toward a potential clash. And the real question is whether Turkey will respond militarily or diplomatically, and the clearest sign will be a Turkish military convoy moving toward the area, because that would be a direct challenge to the Israeli Red Line. The American envoy announced a mechanism to prevent clashes between the countries, but the mechanism is untested, and the real question is whether it holds, because if it fails, the Syrian conflict expands into a regional war. And while Syria absorbs the strike, the next 24 hours will test whether these escalations can be contained. Here is what to watch in the next 24 hours. Fourth, watch the Abu al-Duhur airbase in Syria, because the Israeli strike was a message to Turkey, and the next move is Ankara's, and the real question is whether Turkey responds militarily or diplomatically. Like this video, and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a daily brief. See you tomorrow.